So thank you for the introduction. Hello. Just a little bit about both of us. Obviously, a lot of you know Gary, have seen Gary talk before. Gary is an amateur underwater archaeologist and also now a research associate for the Department of Archaeology at Durham University. And for myself, I'm currently in my final year of studies at Durham University as an undergraduate. And I joined the Hylton Community Association not that long ago, just less than 12 months. So working alongside Gary and the group. Interestingly, this map on the screen now, 1768 map, just wanted to point out that the word bedra, just running alongside the river, is where our community group got the name from, as it's believed to mean river in Roman literature. So just 5 sites of interest for us, which I'm just quickly going to briefly mention. So first is site 5, which is just at the River Wear mouth, which we refer to as the Roker Stones. Then we're going to talk about site 1, which is the wasted anchor field on the north bank. We're also going to talk about a whetstone production site on the south bank, High Ford Dock on the south bank, and it's just covering the
Brickstones.
Oh, of course, the Brickstones on the north bank. And then again, this is just a map of the area of Offerton in 1890, which again demonstrates the site over the century from the last slide.
Okay, so the River Wear runs 60 miles from its source up in Weardale all the way through to Weir Mouth, and you can see through this drone footage the point at which it reaches the sea. Much of the history of the River Wear at Sunderland is associated with the Industrial Revolution. Limescale and lead quarried in Weardale was transferred by rail down to Sunderland, down to the port, and exported along with products such as coal, salt, and also glass. But shipbuilding developed significantly after the 18th century, when the River Wear was essentially redesigned and dredged, which meant that larger ships could actually get in. And throughout its history, Sunderland had over 400 registered shipyards. As the drone footage demonstrates here, as you travel upstream, once you get to about 6 miles or 5 miles, you start going into a much more rural landscape. And our projects are predominantly in that rural aspect. So it's out of that built environment of the city. And the area you're looking at right there is a location called Offerton. And we're going to come back to that in much greater detail later in the slide. But the first area of interest that we're really interested in is called the Roker Stone site. And Orlagh's going to explain what we're doing there.
So this is a site that's been led by the Hylton member Bill Trow, who investigated the suspected Roman stones that had been dumped at the breakwater against the Old North Pier at Roker in Sunderland. They're originally thought to have come from 4 miles upstream, but are said to have been removed in the 19th century by the dredging. Bill's team has identified 55 stones that are believed to be Roman, as the stones still had the remains of dovetail cramps slots on them. In addition to some of the stones, also portrayed other typical Roman construction techniques, such as Lewis holes and pinch bar slots, which can be deemed as later construction techniques. Finally, here's a selection of illustrations that have been done on the stones by Bill, and Bill's research is now actually in the historic environmental records.
Okay, so one of the key sites which was instrumental in this project taking place in the first instance was what we called the Brigstone sites, the Brigstones. So it's an area of North and South Hylton. So you're looking, this photograph is taken standing on the south of the River Wear, looking north. The white buildings that you see, there's a public house there called the Shipwrights, but that stands on North Hylton. So this area has been of great interest to the community archaeology group. The research occasioned by the group has identified a location that potentially had is the site of a Roman crossing. As early as 1737, something existed on the north bank of the River Wear at South Hylton. I'll call it the shipwright site because the pub's there. In this map, you might just make out there's a little reference L, and that is called the Brig Stones or the Bridge Stones. So we think it's a reference to a bridge that may have crossed the river at that location. So nobody really knows exactly what it is. It doesn't exist today. There's nothing to be seen whatsoever. Towards the end of the 19th century, local antiquarians became interested in the site, and letters to the Sunderland Daily Echo by local people sort of highlighted that the area as something significant. They could see this huge structure at low water. It seemed to cross the river. And there's some wonderful references there. The breakstone, a local eyewitness, if you will, highlighted how the breakstones were always dry at low water and left a steep channel 12 to 14 feet wide through which the river rushed at great velocity. And many of the stones were in a fine state of preservation, some even having fine chisel marks on them. Those early references in the newspapers detail how the Riverway commissioners were asked to actually remove the stones. They became a bit of a hazard to the keel boats that would navigate up and down the river, transferring coal from sites at Washington down to the port to be exported. And the keel boats were forever hitting this stone structure. So the Riverway commissioners' records detail how they had a steam-powered winch and dredger, and they would lift out of the water these huge stone blocks, many of which, as you've just seen with as Orlagh highlighted, were taken down to Roker and dumped on the breakwater of the pier. So today there's still nothing there. The site does actually have a HER record, but again, the information detailed here is very scant. It refers back to those original correspondence and document records by our antiquarian friends. But there is a reference to immense blocks of stone carefully wrought and squared, clamped together with iron clamps, run with lead and laid upon a framework of oak timbers. So there's not a great deal of information, certainly nothing modern. So the site, based on all of the research by the Federal Hylton Community Association, has to be the location of the Brigstones. And this is a sort of a visualization where this stone structure may have crossed the river. Back in 2017, the group was successful and secured £80,000 from Heritage Lottery Fund to undertake a survey of the riverbank on the south side, and they commissioned Wardle Armstrong Archaeology to help them do that. Unfortunately, they were unable to find anything that was Roman in date. At about that time, I was asked to come along as a sub-aqua diver to have a look under the water. They'd heard about my explorations in Elvet and wondered if I could help them with their project. So there I am there. I came along back in 2017 and I searched that riverbed and I couldn't find anything significant. There was no structures left in situ. However, what I did find, and this was completely accidental, was this incredible wooden structure. I literally bumped into this and bumped my head. So this is just off the south bank of the river. It has these huge timber upright posts with many meters of sort of horizontal timbers and cross beams. When I first saw this, I couldn't comprehend what it was. The scale was ginormous. And as this is really poor video footage, it's from a GoPro back in 2017. We've never been back to revisit this site, but it's still there. And it wasn't until I went all the way along this timber structure and emerged at the far end and sort of rose up a little bit in the water, and I got to the top. It was only then when it became apparent what it actually was, and the clue was a huge clue. As you can just make out, there are two railway lines on the top, so it's sort of like a narrow gauge rail line on there, and you can sort of see the scale on my hand there. So just above where my hand is, that is an iron, one of two, a pair of iron, and you can sort of see them in section rails. So what in the world was this structure that I found? When we look back at the map, and this is a wonderful example from 1895 of that site, and I've zoomed in a little bit there on the right, you will see what appears to be a patent slipway running down into the river. And that coincidentally just happens to be the exact spot where the timber structure is that I found. When we've researched this location again, we found this incredible photograph, which actually shows that slipway being used, and this all associated with a high ford dock that ran all the way through to the mid 19th century. So basically, I've discovered this patent slipway, which nobody ever knew was still there. And incredibly, when we fly a drone over it today, hopefully you can just make it out. So at real low water, you can just see the faint line of one of the timber beams that go there. So that's an incredible discovery by itself. Linking into the heritage of the Sunderland shipbuilding history. The oval circle on the other side is what we've called the Brigstone site. So I went back to this site and in 2021, it was sort of during the peak of COVID, the group were adamant that the structure had to be there and asked if I would go back and have another look. So I entered the river from the north side. The work that we've been doing on that side has revealed at low water, and these are a whole series of work stone blocks, and hopefully you can just see there we've cleaned a few up, how they have sort of exquisite tool markings on there. There's even a mason's mark, which is unusual given that we presume, or the hypothesis is that this is a Roman site. But we've got under the water is littered with these large timber beams as well, and that again alludes to that original description of the site. But underwater, again, it's quite crude, badly lit GoPro footage. I was able to finally discover some of the brigstones that are still there lying on the riverbed. And hopefully you can see very clearly there that it's a lead and iron cramp in there. We discovered 6 of these brigstones, or large workstone blocks in total. Each of them have 4 lead and iron cramps. We've measured a whole series of them, and we sort of recorded them. We need to revisit this site. I've discovered 6, but I'm very confident that there has to be another dozen there. It's quite a large area. This particular stone block is quite unusual. Hopefully you can see the tool marks on there, the chisel marks. It's relatively narrow, so it's only I'll say 12 inches square, but it's rectangular. It's quite 1.2 meters long. It's got a chamfered edge. And literally, as this video sort of plays through, you'll see another little mason's mark. And those mason marks are what we would expect to find in sort of medieval period stonework. But nevertheless, just as it slows down here, you might just see the 2 triangles of the mason's mark in there. So this in itself is an incredible discovery. When we piece together some of the information, the angles of the stones, it appears that these workstone blocks were part of a cutwater or a pier, and that alludes to a bridge structure. So this information alone will significantly contribute to the HER record for this site. But going forward, working in partnership, we're going to really go back and investigate this site in much greater detail and do some photogrammetry and record exactly. And only then will it inform in what we should do next. Ideally, I'd love to see them being raised and examined, but can we do that? You know, we need to engage with a lot of our partners to ensure that we do that properly. So the next, that's enough on the Brigstone site. I'm going to now jump forward to the Offerton site and hand back over to, oh no, I'm still me, sorry. Right, I'm going to go another mile upstream and just talk about this Offerton location. So this is where we are as the river's disappearing there into the distance. You probably can't make it out, but you've got the town of Chesley Street. It's 4 miles upstream, and Chesley Street is a location for a Roman fort. So the Romans were navigating this river, and without a shadow of doubt, we're very confident on that. It is a prehistoric landscape that's there. There's been a lot of Bronze Age archaeology, kiss burials, found locally in the immediate area. There's records of Bronze Age swords being found in the river as well at Hylton. And there's also a reference to a Bronze Age logboat, which is discovered. X marks the spot, exactly where we're going to be investigating. The actual position of that X is in doubt, though. It may not be the exact location, but it does appear on several maps. Offerton as a location has had some occupation, and the dwellings that typically existed at this location on the riverbank were there basically to house the keelboat men, the people responsible for navigating these relatively shallow boats from the port of Sunderland up to Washington and indeed Chesterfield to load up with coal. So they were there pretty much from the 17th to the late 19th century, and then they've gone and nobody's been there ever since. So the Offerton site is somewhere that's really, really interesting. In the river, scuba diving, I've been able to find 5 stone anchors. Now, these anchors in themselves are incredible discoveries. The simple, in essence, they are simple weight anchors where the stone is pierced with a single hole for the rope. They're either oval, trapezoidal, or rectangular in shape. Honor Frost calls these rock anchors. They would have been designed for a rocky seabed, but they would have dragged along a river, a sandy bottom. But if you look at Gerard Capitan's classification, it suggests that they are similar in form to a type 4 anchor, which would date into that late Bronze Age period. And that's the initial theory that we were working on. Professor Richard Hingley from the Department of Archaeology visited the site, and based on the information that we found and the fact that these wooden posts protrude from the riverbank at the same location, alluded to a port, a possible Roman port. And news of that discovery was picked up on local radio. It went on the BBC website, and it ran with the Archaeology magazine. So it just did create a little bit of interest, although we were alluding to a Roman anchors at that time. It was way too early, and we didn't really know. On the north bank of the site, I'm just going to hand back to Orlagh. Or was it me again?
That's still you.
Is what we've called the wasted anchor field. It's another site of interest. This is completely on the north bank. And what we've discovered here is a whole series of what we call wasted anchors. They've got clear chiseling marks to create a series of grooves, normally the crisscross over the rocks. These are quite large rocks. It would take 2 to 3 people to lift them. We have to lever them. But they are left in situ, and we've got 13 in total. We're going to obviously revisit that whole site. But them by themselves are really important discovery, and it helps build a picture up of that location. Right, this time Orla is going for it.
So now we're going to look at site 2, which we've titled the whetstone production site. And this is where I actually come into the project and work alongside Gary and the group in around early February this year. So it's a really early discovery. Just press it again to play it. So here's another video just outlining the site and visualise where we're talking about. And some amazing drone shots captured by Gary himself. So this site itself is 6 miles up from the mouth of the River Wear, and it's located on the south side of the river, where Gary's just previously spoke about the 1822 map that you saw at the Offerton Hub. At this point of study, we've identified an excess of 500 whetstones just within this 100 metres that we've looked at so far. And from the early research that we've been doing, this is, I believe, the biggest in the UK, but correct me if I am wrong. The site is actually only visible partially throughout the year due to the thick layer of mud that you can see currently in the video. And it's only after heavy rainfall that the site is actually exposed. And here now, Gary's going to wash one off in the video just to show you the tool marks. Interestingly, the group actually refers to these as Mars bars, the singular ones. Apparently that's how big they used to be before my time. Yeah, and then any double whetstones the group refers to as Kit Kats. And that's just the site again. And it's just about to show you that actually the whetstones themselves are oozing out of the side of the bank. And we're currently trying to work against the erosion that is happening now in the last 50 years that the bank has been exposed. So this is just cleaning them off to show how they're currently in the bank. And this is really interesting. This is where it is. Yeah, these are the 5 stone anchors just in the riverbed, opposite from where our site that we're looking at now actually is. Just to highlight the importance of the site on this 1892 map, which has been overlaid onto a modern ESRI map by Keith Cockrell, who is a key asset in the Vedra-Hylton Association. It just demonstrates the erosion that has taken place somewhat rapidly on the site. The largest issue with the site is the erosion, as it's been exposed for the past 50 years, and because of its exposure, you can now see how it's starting to expand. And it really just shows the importance and urgency to try and get this site recorded. So now there's just going to be a few pictures of the whetstones themselves that are going to run. That takes my notes away.
Just run with it.
Yeah. So here's just some examples of what we found, both not been removed and having been removed and cleaned off. They are quite similar to some whetstones that were found in northern Gaul. There was 3 sites that were looked at, 2 in Belgium and 1 in northern France. I'm not going to try and say their names because I will butcher that completely. But quite interestingly, this next one, that's a whetstone pretty much at final production. So the typology of our whetstones themselves lend themselves to John Allen, who is a British archaeologist identification as a parallel piped with rectangular cross sections, and were often manufactured in workshops and likely widely distributed. Whetstones themselves are typical of Roman sites and have been identified in Roman sites across the UK, however, and wider in European context. However, production sites themselves are very limited. There's only 2 in the UK, one at Roxeter on the Welsh borders and also in the Roman fortress at Usk. So they've been very overlooked previously. Again, I mentioned the 3 previous sites in Gaul. And this illustration just demonstrates how what we believe our whetstones are being produced as. So if you just look to the left view at the V-shaped groove, that's how we believe our whetstones were being produced. They lend themselves very similarly to that. But we don't have, as you can see, the grooves underneath. We don't believe we have anything that lends itself to that technique. Again, this illustration is quite interesting as it looks at the cross-section of the whetstones from the sites in Gaul and compares them to the ones we have that Gary's holding himself in the pictures just there. And we believe they're most like the Brusingen examples. Please don't mind if I mess that up. Then interestingly, we have an anomaly just here on the site, which looks to be some type of slab that's been practiced on by whoever was producing the whetstones at the time. We believe it's practice as it's clearly been discarded either as an unsuccessful technique or somebody's just done it completely wrong. But it lends itself quite nicely actually to this, which is straight across from our site itself, and is a sandstone outcrop, which is interesting because it suggests that that's where they were sourcing the material for production, as through this analysis, it suggests that the river on the north bank is mudstone, siltstone and sandstone, which is something that was very typical for whetstone production. However, this is something that with funding and everything else we hope to later explore. Yeah, so overall, they're definitely modest and overlooked, but we believe they're vital tools which have only received larger attention in the last 10 years, and it's something that we want to expand on massively. Yeah, thank you.